Hi, and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's book-to-show comparison for The Expanse Season 3, Episode 6, Immolation. This video is part of a series of videos where I compare episodes of The Expanse TV show to that of its source material, pointing out the differences and giving my opinions on how well these adaptations work. So I have to start with a spoiler warning for The Expanse up to the end of Season 3. If you haven't seen up to this point, you may not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. However, this video will not contain future spoilers from the novels that have yet to occur in the show past Season 3, so if you've seen up to Season 3 but you haven't read the novels, not to worry, this video will be safe from future spoilers. So our episode begins on Earth in the UN war room where Gillis, Ehrenreich, and all the other UN heads are just now hearing the transmissions from Io of Admiral Wynn saying that he put down an attempted mutiny by Admiral Souther. Gillis demands to know what's going on, but an admiral apologizes and says that the time delay in the AO of Io is 39 minutes and he'll let him know as soon as they have more. Just then, another report comes in that the UN ship Jimenez was destroyed by the Agatha King. Gillis is enraged that their own ships are firing at each other, and he demands to know what the fuck is going on out there. But nobody has a good answer for him. Now, as I explained in the previous video, in the novels, the timeline of events, the way things went down, is a bit different. At this stage, Gillis had already declared an investigation into an illegal bioweapons program which directly implicated Ehrenreich. Around Io, two fleets prepared to clash, Wynn's fleet and a combined fleet of the Rocinante, Souther's fleet, and a Martian fleet. And Gillis had sent a message to all UN ships ordering Admiral Wynn and his fleet back to Earth for questioning regarding the investigation. But what it really signifies is that Ehrenreich cut a deal with Gillis and threw Wynn under the bus. Wynn didn't take too kindly to this and responded by shooting at Souther's fleet. So in the novels, Gillis knew exactly what was going on and was more in the loop. But what I like about the scene here is that it's true to the time delay that occurs over large distances. I believe this was touched on in the show before, but the novels hammer this point down repeatedly, and it becomes a major factor. And I love how it plays a huge role here, as Earth is just now getting transmissions of an event that occurred nearly 40 minutes ago. It makes things much more dire and is a good use of the lag. So I'm going to give this a +1. So then we go over to Io as Holden, Draper, Amos, and Prax watch in horror as the pods full of protomolecule hybrids are launched into space. Holden orders Alex to destroy the pods. He fires up the PDCs and tries to destroy as many as he can, but most slip by, and soon after the Rosinate's PDCs run dry as they used up all their ammo. Alex points out that they weren't the only ones shooting, that the UNN and the MCRN ships were shooting at them as well, and indeed, we do see some shots of that in space, as one pod is grazed by PDC fire and is deflected to collide with a UNN ship. Holden asks where the pods were headed, but Naomi answers that the pods' transponders went dark and they were using stealth technology that is impossible to track. But Avasarala says that they're going to Mars. When Alex asks her if she's sure, she reasons that they have to because Ehrenreich has controlled the base and his whole war is against Mars. Holden then orders his team inside the compound, saying that perhaps they can find a way to stop the pods from inside. So in the novels, the Rocinante was in orbit of Io when the pods were launched, not on the ground, and as soon as they were launched, Avasarala ordered all the ships in the fleet, which at this stage was every ship except for the Agatha King, to fire on the pods. But as in the show, the fleet didn't get them all, and the ones that they didn't get went stealth and became impossible to track as soon as they escaped. However, there was never any question as to where they were headed, because before the battle began, the compound on Io sent a message that threatened to launch the biological weapons at Mars. But in the novels, they somehow immediately seemed to know the key to stopping the pods was on the Agatha King, not on the compound in Io. So they immediately started messaging Admiral Wynn, asking him to give them the transponder codes for the pods, but at this stage the king had already been infected with the protomolecule, and he demanded to be rescued as a price for giving the codes. But Avasarala and Sulla refused, as the king was under quarantine, and they refused to rescue anyone from the ship under risk of protomolecule contamination. So Holden volunteered to go over to the Agatha King to retrieve the data, while the Rosinante went to the surface of Io so that Draper, Amos, and Prax could go into the compound to retrieve the children. So it was clear their mission in the compound was only to retrieve the children, and Holden on the Agatha King had the mission of getting the transponder codes. Also in this scene, Naomi states that if the protomolecule hybrids get to Mars, it could become another Eros, whereas in the novels they had already discussed the possibility earlier, where Prax explained that it would be worse than Eros because Mars has a much larger population. Also, the point that the protomolecule is all linked and the hybrids can't be controlled and will just start spreading the protomolecule is harped on much more in the books as well, which I'm not sure why that point was abandoned in the show, so I'm going to give this a -1. So then we go to the compound on Io, where we see Jules Pierre Mal and Dr. Strickland looking at the security feeds of Holden and his team infiltrating the base. Because they are in Martian suits, they assume that they're Martian soldiers. So Mal says that they need to all surrender and gather up all the data and just hand it over to them, but Strickland insists that it's not over yet and they still have time to get away in their ships. When Mal asks why they wouldn't just shoot their ships down, Strickland answers that they'll just say that they have children on board. So Mal orders his security guards to send all the security men to the upper levels to fight off the Martians and tells them that the Martians intend to kill everyone. When the security man protests that they'll all die, Mal simply asks if he wants to go with them. But Strickland says that he can buy them more time, so then we see him going to the protomolecule hybrid that used to be Katoa and preparing to unleash him on the invaders. However, we see from his perspective that the protomolecule is clearly linked because we see the protomolecule on Venus through the hybrid's eyes. So in the novels, as I mentioned before, we never saw through Mal and Strickland's perspective, and Mal wasn't even on Io in the books. Also, the compound on Io was portrayed as being in communique with the Agatha King, so they were perfectly aware of what was going on in orbit, and the fleet was sent there with intent of dismantling the base and arresting them all. That's what Wynn's fleet was there to do, to protect against. So when Wynn's fleet fell, they knew that they would be the next victims. However, they didn't seem to have any plans to evacuate, and in fact all seemed confused on what to do when the Martians got there. They did, however, have a protomolecule hybrid protecting them, so perhaps they were hoping it would fight them off. In the novels, there was just Prax and Amos who penetrated the base, and they seemed completely unaware that they had done so. I suppose their security measures were much better in the show. Anyway, I think this show's version does add nicely to the tension, so I'm going to give this a +2. So then we see Holden and his team infiltrating the base, where Draper reports massive movement 6 levels below. Prax asks if they're children, but Draper says no, so they deduce it is an armed resistance. They take the elevator down, and on the way they get into a casual conversation about how Draper grew into her suit, which prompted Holden to tell a story about how he once grew a watermelon in a box as a science project and it came out square. Listening to them on the Rosinante, Naomi asks if they've gone apoxic, but Avasarala says that they're just whistling in the dark, trying to distract themselves before the big battle. Once they get there, they immediately are fired at. Prax goes out shooting, but Amos pushes him down, telling him to take cover first, then fire. Holden asks for a count. Draper yells out 4, then proceeds to easily kill them all and says clear. They then proceed into the hall towards where they think that the children are. Now in the novels, as I mentioned, Holden wasn't on the assault team on Io and instead went to the Agatha King. Draper did not go into the compound with Amos and Prax. However, unlike the show, she did not go inside the compound, as the protomolecule hybrid was waiting for them outside the compound, so instead she went after it, while Amos and Prex went into the compound to retrieve May. And Amos and Prex, as I said earlier, were undetected, and their mission was more one of stealth, and in fact managed to slip by mostly undetected. They never had to deal with a fighting resistance as they do here. Plus, there was never a scene of them casually chatting before a fight, which I thought was a nice added touch, so I'm going to give this a +1. Then we go back to the Brisnante, where Avasarala becomes visually frustrated and she tells Naomi to make this thing show her what's going on in orbit, which shows her a schematic of all the ships. She focuses on the Agatha King, saying that it's Suther's ship, and asks if she can see it. Alex says he can bring up the scopes, and on screen they see the Agatha King is glowing blue. Naomi then clarifies that the Agatha King has been hit with the protomolecule and thus is probably infected, and that she doesn't want to go anywhere near it. Avasarala responds by saying, "Oh God." So in the novels, as I mentioned, the Rocinante was in orbit when the Agatha King was struck by the protomolecule. In fact, the Agatha King sent out a distress call saying they surrendered and asking for help, to which Sutter responded by sending ships to help. But Avasarala called the ships off, saying that the Agatha King was under quarantine and any ships that docked with it would be under quarantine as well. But that didn't deter all of the ships, as several ships kept going towards the Agatha King. Avasarala then said, "Am I the only fucking one who remembers what happened on Eros?" Then all the other ships turn around as well. And after that, Sutter shoots down escape pods that attempt to leave the Agatha King. I think I much preferred the books version because, as often with this section, it gave Avasarala more to do. Plus, I like how everyone was clearly aware of what was going on. So I'm going to give this a -3. So then we go over to the Agatha King, where we see Kotiar in the med bay floating in 0G as he just gains consciousness. A young ensign bursts through the doors, scared and confused, and she's chased by a big man who's glowing blue, chasing her. A struggle ensues where it looks like the blue glowing man has the advantage, but Kotiar, who's still handcuffed to the bed, wraps his legs around the man in a scissoring move, which allows the ensign time to recover, and then she shoots the man in the head. Freaked out, she yells that the man went crazy and tried to kill her. Kotiar tries to calm her down and asks for her name, and she identifies herself as Larson. She tells the story of how when she went with the damage control teams when the ship was holed, but there was this blue stuff there and it was everywhere and people just started killing each other. She then notices that Kotiar is in restraints and asks why that is, but he's just staring at her leg. She follows his gaze and sees a wound where blue stuff is on it. She swipes at it, but Kotiar yells at her not to touch it. She then demands to know what's going on, and he tells her that it's protomolecule, the same stuff that was on Eros, and that it kills everything in its path and it cannot be stopped. She realizes that this means that she's basically dead. She gets a crazy look on her face and shoots her gun. Kotiar reacts defensively, thinking she's shooting at him, but instead she shoots his restraints and frees him. He then asks for her help to stop the spread of the infection, but she says that it's too late. She just sits down and gives up and says she doesn't even know what she's fighting for anymore, and she hands him the gun. So Kotiar heads off on his own to try to stop the protomolecule. Now, there was an Ensign Larson in the novels who just happened to be male, and he was involved in a bigger storyline involving Holden, as Kotiar wasn't on the Agatha King in the novels. So in the novels, when Holden boards the Agatha King, he's wearing a hazmat suit to protect himself from the protomolecule and the radiation on board, and Larson was hiding in a closet when stuff started going down on the Agatha King, and he just pops out swinging a wrench at Holden, thinking he was a monster, but Holden manages to subdue him and then makes it clear that he's not infected, and he's is there to help. When Holden mentions that he has admiral level clearance, Larson mistakes him for an admiral, but really Souther gave him that clearance. Holden and Larson then set off on an adventure to get to the CIC to get the transponder codes to the hybrid pods. Now, this scene is a nice homage to that book storyline, and for the record, I don't mind at all that they gender swapped Larson's character, as in fact, I think the actress playing her did a great job. My only complaint is that we didn't get to see more of this character, but I'll touch on that shortly. I like her inclusion here, and it was nice to include Kotiar, who makes sense for the show's version of events, so I'm going to give this a +3. Kotiar then puts on a vac suit and heads into the corridor with his gun at the ready and finds a bunch of dead bodies and some blue protomolecule growing on the ceilings and the walls, and he proceeds onwards. So this one brief scene hints at a much larger storyline in the books where Holden and Larson travel through the Agatha King trying to make it to the CIC. In that instant, instead of dead bodies being everywhere, the corridors were eerily empty. And Larson mentions that every time he asks for a location of anyone he knows, the answer is always the same, the forward galley. Which is an area that they need to cross in order to get to the CIC, which Holden knows is not good, as it means that they've all been turned into what he refers to as vomit zombies. And then there's a long haunted house horror type sequence of Holden and Larson fighting their way past hundreds of possessed protomolecule zombies who are much smarter and quicker than the ones that Holden had encountered before, and the two of them barely escape with their lives several times. It's a super intense and terrifying sequence, which in my opinion is one of the most iconic and memorable sequences in the entire novels, one which is referenced to several times in the future. So I was massively disappointed when I found out that this show decided to leave this sequence out entirely. I don't know if they were just too afraid of coming off too much like The Walking Dead, or if they just simply didn't have the budget for it. Either way, I saw it as a huge missed opportunity and a massive mistake. I don't even mind that Holden wasn't the one who boarded the ship. They had a chance to do a similar sequence with Kotiar and Larson, whom they had played by a very good actor, and they could fill this sequence instead. So the fact that they just simply had Larson give up and stay behind was a huge misuse of that character, and they also missed the opportunity to use Kotiar as a stand-in for Holden so they could recreate this amazing horror sequence. So I'm going to give this a -5. So then we go to I.O., where we see Draper leading Holden and the others in the compound. She detects that heat signature of the children, so knows exactly where to go. However, then she detects another heat signature that she identifies as a protomolecule hybrid. Holden then orders that they all fall back to the Rosnate, but Draper says no, that they need to get the children out of there, so she'll distract the hybrid and lead it away. Before Holden has time to argue, Draper runs off towards it. Avasarala, who is monitoring from the Rosinante, tells Draper that facing the hybrid won't bring her dead Marines back, but Draper tells her to please shut the fuck up. And then she begins shooting at the hybrid and running in a different direction and hoping that it will chase after her, which it does. So in the novels, as I already mentioned, Holden wasn't there, but more to the point, they spotted the hybrid before they went into the compound on the surface of Io. At this stage, they lost communication, as is common when a hybrid attack is about to occur. So Avasarala wasn't able to tell Draper anything, and Draper simply mimed to Amos that he and Prax should go inside the compound to get the children, and Amos does so without argument. However, the internal monologue of Draper implies that she purposely wanted to face the hybrid in order to face her inner demons, kind of like how Luke felt he needed to confront Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi, as she mentions all the dreams she had of confronting the hybrid again, and in fact she had to convince herself that she wasn't dreaming now. This is also kind of conveyed in the show through Avasarala telling her that this isn't going to bring her dead Marines back, but Draper seemed much more angry than she was in the books, but in both cases, they were doing it because it was the right thing to do to save the children. But in the show, that comes off a bit more strongly. Plus, I love Draper telling Avasarala to shut the fuck up. So I'm going to give this a +2. So then we go back to Earth, where Ehrenreich is informed that missiles have been launched from Io and their destination is unknown as they use stealth technology. Then we see Pastor Anna looking at all the protesters outside as she gathers up the strength to confront Gillis, which she does, and he tells her that if she's there to apologize, he really doesn't give a shit, but she clarifies that she is not, and instead brings up the past where he led protesters into a hostile situation knowing that some would die. In fact, he wanted some to die so they could be martyrs, which would strengthen their cause, but he retorts that it was her speech that made them martyrs, and she says that she accepts her own blame in the situation. But Gillis tells her to leave the past alone, and she says that she wants to leave the past behind, but the thing is, the same thing is happening again, and this time she isn't going to walk away. This time she's going to make him do the right thing, and then she plays for him the incriminating message from Ehrenreich. Now, in the novels, as I mentioned earlier, there was no incriminating message from Ehrenreich, and Pastor Anna didn't know Gillis and wasn't a part of this story. Further, they changed Gillis's background, as in the novels he gained celebrity when he was held as a political prisoner for many years in his youth. It was the only reason he was elected Secretary General, and he had no real qualifications otherwise. In fact, when he was giving the speech about starting the investigation into the illegal bioweapons, he mentioned his time when he was a political prisoner, and Avasarala cheered at that because she knew that he only used that as his trump card when it was very important to instantly gain the public support. And of course, all it took was that possibility that there was corruption in the government rather than the hard evidence that Anna has here, because his whole campaign was all about weeding out corruption in the government. But this works better as it goes into more detail about these characters and fleshes them out more, so I'm going to give this a +2. So then we go back to Io, where Holden, Prax, and Amos go into the nursery where the children were being held, which is now empty. They see signs of children, but no children. Holden looks in the database and finds a picture of May and confirms for Prax that she is in fact here, therefore she can't be far behind, so Amos and Prax run after her. Now, this is a huge revelation for Prax, who thought May was dead, because this confirms for him that she is still alive, so it gives him more motivation. In the show, they follow the heat signatures of the children to find the nursery, whereas in the novels, they don't have heat signatures, so instead they just follow signs to the main lab. Further, there was no nursery in the novels, as the children were still in stasis at this stage, and it isn't until after Prax finds Dr. Strickland that he finds May, who suddenly speaks up and calls for him. So he doesn't know she's alive until he sees her. I think either way works fine, so I'm going to give this a 0. So Holden uses the security cameras to look for the children and finds Dr. Strickland with them going towards the ship. Amos and Prax run after it, but Holden stays behind to depressurize the bay to slow their escape. Alex over the comm then asks Holden if there's a way to stop the hybrids from there, but Holden has to tell him that there isn't, that the launch codes were all given to the Agatha King. Alex says there must be another way. Holden then spots Jules Pierre Mao on the security cameras and says there's someone there who may know another way, and he's going to go ask him. Meanwhile, Alex begins to bring the Razorback down from orbit. When Naomi asks why, he answers that he's going to take the Razorback to the Agatha King to get the abort codes, but Naomi tells him that he can't do it alone, so she chases after him and tells Avasarala to keep an eye on their people. So in the novels, Prax and Amos just happen to stumble across Strickland because they hear him and another woman yelling at each other, and Prax recognizes his voice. And as I mentioned, they never expected to find a way to stop the hybrids from that location, and Jules Pierre Mao wasn't there in the novels. Neither was Holden, for that matter. So all of that was created for the show. As for Alex and Naomi taking the razor back to the Agatha King, as I mentioned in the novels, it was Holden who did it, not Alex and Naomi. And although it kind of bothered me at first that they changed this, ultimately I'm okay with it because the novels, particularly the early ones, focused on Holden way too much and gave him all the good stuff to do, mainly because he was a viewpoint character, whereas characters like Alex and Naomi typically got shortchanged. So it does make some sense that Alex would have more personal involvement, seeing that it's his home world that's about to be destroyed, something I don't think the novels really touched on enough. However, Naomi leaving Avasarala in command of the Rosnate is a bit ridiculous, I have to say, so I'm going to give this a -1. So then we see Bobby Draper luring the protomolecule hybrid above ground and continuing to shoot at it, and it howls in anger in response and chases after her even faster. She leads it into an industrial structure with many different levels that consist of bare materials. She runs and uses her rockets to jump far, but the hybrid manages to keep stride. As she's running, her suit can track it by having a rear view image of the protomolecule hybrid as the rest of the revision is focused forward. However, she still manages to lose it and doesn't know where it is, and then she turns to find it snuck its way ahead of her, but before she can do anything about it, it tackles her far to the ground as they fall far from a large height. Presumably her suit and low gravity on Io is what allows her to survive such a fall. Now, in the novels, there was never such a structure, and Draper confronted the hybrid in an open field of Io where there was nowhere to hide. Also, Bobby's confrontation with the hybrid in the novels was much shorter and didn't have this long, involved chase scene that it does here. Although there was a part in the novel where Bobby was running from the hybrid, but her suit tracked it, showing her the rear view of it chasing her. However, in the novels, it was implied that the hybrid couldn't catch up with her, so it just started throwing rocks at her that nearly kills her. She eventually fires an explosive charge at the hybrid, which lands and nearly blows it up from the inside, but it rips that part of its body off and throws it at Bobby Draper, and it was the part that the bomb was embedded in, and the bomb explodes in close proximity to Draper, which is what causes her suit to malfunction for her to become paralyzed so that the hybrid looms over her. So it's the same result, but the books get to it in a different way. Personally, I think what the show did was far more exciting, as it was a much more involved and intense chase scene, and adding the structure made it far more visually interesting than it was described in the novels, which would have been a bit more plain, so I'm going to give this a +4. So then we go over to Earth, where we see Secretary General Gillis call Aaron Wright into his office to show him that he has the evidence that incriminates him in a conspiracy with Jules Pierre Mal. When Aaron Wright asks where he got it from, the shot pans over to reveal Pastor Anna is also in the room, and she answers by saying, "Does it matter?" Aaron Wright then talks directly to Anna, telling her that Gillis has no principles and he's just parroting her because she was the last person that he talked to, and if the last person he talked to happened to be a janitor, then he would be singing the virtues of a mop. But Gillis, sick of being talked about in the third person, tells Aaron Wright that if there's anything he wants to say to him, this will be his last chance. So Aaron Wright turns to Gillis and tells him that he tried to save Earth, whereas Gillis was only worried about trying to protect his own legacy, and that Earth deserves better than him. Gillis then calls the guards and informs them that Aaron Wright is under arrest for treason, and then they take him away. Anna approaches Gillis smiling, telling him that he did the right thing, but Gillis says that his legacy was going to be the destruction, this destructive war, but thanks to her, that's all on Aaron Wright now. And Anna is left frowning at how twisted, selfish, and greedy Gillis is. So in the novels, as I mentioned, there was no incriminating evidence, but Gillis did launch an investigation into the conspiracy at Avesarella's warning, so it was inevitable that he would discover the truth. So Aaron Wright made a deal with Gillis as he bargained for a lesser penalty while putting all the blame on Admiral Wynne. Of course, in the novels, all this happened quote-unquote off-screen, as they say, but it is said that Aaron Wright got no jail time whatsoever, which sets him apart from his show counterpart. And that book Aaron Wright's only punishment for his involvement in this conspiracy was that he was forced to resign, in which Avasarala took his place. However, in the novels, Aaron Wright didn't appear nearly as much as he did in the show, and he wasn't the main villain as he was in the show. So I was expecting an ending more grand for him than simply Anna showing Gillis the evidence and then him getting arrested. And while his punishment was greater than the novels, I'm not sure this ending was befitting enough for this grand villain that the show had established, so I'm going to give this a -2. So then we go back to I.O., where we see Dr. Strickland and the nurse with the children trying to get into a hangar bay, but they can't. They then hear gunfire approaching, so Strickland tells the nurse to get out of the airlock but leave the children behind. When they're out, the nurse deduces that Strickland wants to use the children to threaten to blow the airlock if they're harmed. Strickland nods, and then the nurse turns her back to get prepared, and Strickland shoots her in the back, killing her. Then Prax and Amos arrive, aiming their guns at him, and he acts all happy to see them and claims that it was the nurse that was holding the children hostage, but he took care of her. However, Strickland recognizes Prax and is surprised to see him and tells him that he took good care of May. Prax simply asks where she is, and so Strickland opens the airlock, and father and daughter are finally reunited. So in the novel, Strickland is arguing with a woman, but it's not a nurse, it's a businesswoman who was in the promotional videos for the hybrids. Amos and Prax hear them arguing, and one of them wonders what would happen if armed gunmen showed up, and Amos just pops up out of nowhere and says something like, "Yeah, what would happen then?" And then Dr. Strickland shoots and kills the other woman, blowing her face off, and her death is described as quite grotesque. Strickland then claims that she was holding them all hostage and he tried to help the children. When he sees Prax, he's not at all surprised because he knew Prax was coming from all the publicity. However, before Prax can yell at Strickland, he hears May call out to him and is totally distracted by that and begins to hug May, whom at first he doesn't really recognize as she looks much older than he remembered. So I thought that both versions worked for their respective mediums, so I'm going to give this a 0. So we then see Holden approach Jules Pierre Mal and his goon. The goon tries to draw his gun, but Holden kills him before he can fire it. Not wanting to suffer the same fate, Mal throws up his hands and announces that he's unarmed. Holden trains his gun on him and then pats him down to confirm that he's unarmed. Mal says that everything they did, they were trying to find a way to stop what was happening on Venus. Holden asks if he did find a way or if he can stop the pods that are on their way to Mars, and Mal answers no to both, so Holden just tells him to shut the fuck up. He then instructs him to pick up the cases that they were carrying and marches him out at gunpoint. So in the novels, as I mentioned earlier, Jules Pierre Mal was not on Io, and neither was Holden for that matter, so this is all new material. However, it was Holden's actions that got Jules Pierre Mal sent to prison for the rest of his life, and all of his family assets seized and his empire destroyed. In the novels, Holden visits him in prison just as he's being arraigned, so that Mal can know that it was him who did this to him. I think it makes more sense for Clarissa Mal's storyline coming up that Holden be the one who arrests Jules Pierre Mal, as it makes more sense why she would blame Holden specifically for her father's downfall and the downfall of her whole family. While it's true in the novels Holden's actions led to Mal's downfall, but it could be argued that Avasarala had a larger role to play in Mal's downfall, so it doesn't make as much sense that Clarissa would zero in on Holden and not Avasarala. Whereas in the show, Holden physically was the one to arrest Mal and drag him away at gunpoint. It makes a lot more sense why she would focus more on him. That being said, it does give Holden a lot less to do in this part of the story than it did in the books, but I think I'm ultimately okay with that, so I'm going to give this a +2. So then we go back to Prax and Amos as Prax talks to May, asking if she's okay. May answers by saying they hurt Katoa, whom Prax recognizes as Bajia's son. He then asks Strickland what he did with Katoa, who is hesitant to answer, but May continues that he got all blue and then got sick, so Prax and Amos then know exactly what happened to him. Prax then asks if they hurt her the way that they hurt Katoa. Strickland interrupts by saying that he would never do that, but Amos ominously warns him that no, really, he should shut the fuck up. And May confirms that she's okay. Prax then introduces her to Amos, whom he introduces him out as the best friend in the whole wide world. And it's evident that Amos is surprised and touched by the compliment. Prax then tells May and the other children to go with Amos as Daddy just needs to talk with Dr. Strickland for a minute. So, as Amos leads May and the other children away, Prax pushes Strickland into the airlock, while the whole time he's trying to convince him that he looked out for May and she's only alive because of him. But once they're in the airlock, Prax pulls his gun on Strickland, who falls to his knees and continues to beg for his life. However, Amos comes from behind and puts a gentle hand on Prax's gun and slowly pushes it down while telling him that he's not that guy. So Prax leaves and Strickland gets to his feet, thanking Amos, but Amos gives Strickland a cold look that makes him pause. Amos then says, "I am that guy," and then kills Dr. Strickland. So in the novels, May, I think, is much younger and is just waking up from sedation, so the only thing she ever says in this scene is "da." And the conversation is mostly just with Strickland, who at first tries to play the victim. But Amos says that he knows who he is, that he's one of Protogen's sociopaths, and Strickland then drops the friendly facade and angrily tells them that May's only alive because of him. However, Amos and Prax deduce that he only kept her alive because of her celebrity status, because of the GoFundMe campaign, so he wanted to use her as a bargaining chip. But Strickland asks what the difference does that make if the end result is the same. Amos then asks Prax to get Strickland's gun, and he does so. Prax then considers killing him, but ultimately decides against it, saying that now Prax has his daughter back, nothing else matters. He no longer cares about any feelings of hate or revenge, so he doesn't have to kill him because he's above that. Strickland relaxes, thinking that he's safe, but then without warning, Amos just kills him, which frightens May a little, but her back was turned to it. Prax then says, or that, being okay with what Amos did. So in the novels, Prax never turned into this cold, unfeeling man that he did in the show. And while it was nice that being reunited with his daughter made Prax forget all of his anger, I think the show set up a different dynamic where his anger and need for revenge would be harder to forget. So the solution of Amos saving him from falling deeper than he could recover from was a brilliant move for the show and ultimately made it much more powerful. Not to mention, this brought about probably the singular most iconic quote from the entire show, "I am that guy," which was predictable yet nonetheless an amazing moment, so I'm going to give this a +5. So then we go to Alex and Naomi on the Razorback as they approach the Agatha King. As they inspect it, they determine that the protomolecule learned how to infect and take over ships, which is a very bad thing, as it means it could potentially control the whole ship. So they try to find a place close to CIC to dock, and Naomi manages to find a utility port nearby. They enter the CIC to find everyone in it dead, and they go to the computer to try to regain control of the hybrids when Admiral Wen shoots at them, but thankfully his gun was out of ammo and just clicks harmlessly, and he tells them that they're wasting their time because it can't be stopped. So The show happens to have a rather convenient utility port where Alex and Naomi can just go straight to the CIC without having to worry about crawling through the ship. Unlike the novels, where Holden had to make his way past hundreds of smart zombies intent on killing him in his really horrific, crazily intense sequence just so he could get to the CIC. When at the CIC, Holden and Larson did encounter Admiral Wynn, who was holding a gun and threatening them, but Holden simply just shot him and went about his day. Now, granted, in this situation, he was armed, whereas here, he clearly was not. So again, the show had the opportunity to recreate the iconic zombie horror sequence, this time with Alex and Naomi, but instead they find a very convenient hatch conveniently located right next to the fucking CIC. Convenient hatch is very convenient. So, -5. So then we go back to Io, where we see Bobby Draper paralyzed, has her suit is disabled and not responding. The protomolecule hybrid slowly approaches her and looms over her. Instead of killing her, it seems to study her, looming over her and pushing her down several times. It then seems to get distracted by something as it looks up in the sky, which gives Draper time to get her suit functional again, and she raises her gun arm and blows half of its head off. It falls to the ground dead. Now, in the novels, once it has Draper on the ground, it seems to examine her and pushes her down. However, it starts to get a tube out and starts spraying protomolecule at her. It begins fingering her suit, looking for a way in as it continues to spray the protomolecule all over her suit. The implication being that it's trying to infect her rather than kill her, which goes against Mal's programming, but as Avasarala discussed earlier, it overrode its programming and is now serving the protomolecule, whose goal seems to be to infect anyone they come across, which is also true of the Agatha King as they continue to spray Holden and Larson with protomolecule, and it's only Holden's hazmat suit that saves him, just as Bobby Draper's armor saves her here. While it's trying to find a way to get into her suit, Draper manages to get her suit operational again and blows half of its head off, killing it. Now, in the show, when the hybrid gets distracted by something happening in the sky, I believe this is meant to be the work on the moment where the work on Venus is finished and that giant space tick or whatever prepares to launch. This didn't happen in the novels, as the launch wouldn't happen until much later in the novels, but I do think that adds a lot to the eeriness to it. Plus, I love the way this scene was shot, so I'm going to give this a +1. So then we go back to the Agatha King, where Naomi tries to change course on the protomolecule pods headed to Mars. The whole time, Wynn is going on spouting hate speech against Martians. He calls them prideful and arrogant insects that stop being human the moment they claim that miserable red planet. He tells Naomi that as a Belter, she should be thanking him, as if he didn't put them down, they'd do the same to her people. Naomi then announces that she managed to change course on a pod, which Alex congratulates her for, but she said it was only one pod. Wynn taunts them that they won't get them all in time and that it only takes one pod to destroy Mars. Alex finally says, well, bless his heart, I may have to shoot this son of a bitch, but Naomi holds him back. So in the novels, Holden didn't need to try to disable or change course on all the pods. All he needed was the transponder codes to track them, and Earth and Mars could just take care of the rest. And Wynn had all the codes in his hand terminal, which he offered in exchange for his life. As in the novels, Admiral Wynn was a lot more cowardly and sniveling, and he didn't care about anything, he just wanted off the ship. Funny thing is that Holden offered Ensign Larson off the ship, but not Admiral Wynn. When Wynn refused, Holden just shot and killed him, grabbed the hand terminal with the transponder codes, and that seemed to be the end of that. So I love the change in Wynn to be a badass, taunting prick, as he's accepted that he's going to die, but doesn't really care as long as he takes the Martians with him. That makes this whole scene much more ominous and much more intense, so I'm going to give this a +3. So a message then comes up from Kotar, who's in the engine room. The message is warning all the ships to steer clear of the Agatha King as it's been infected with the protomolecule, and that he plans to destroy the ship by overloading its core. Naomi is worried that it won't give her enough time to stop the pods. Avasarala tells her that she knows this man and says that if she can talk to him, she may be able to talk him down. But Naomi informs her that he disabled the comms as he doesn't want to be talked to. Kotar, whose suit is damaged and is now glowing blue from the protomolecule, says that he always thought he'd have something grand to say in this moment, or something at least pithy, but he can't think of anything. He then overloads the core, killing himself. The ship then blares warning alarms that the ship will soon explode, and Wynn responds to this by laughing hysterically. Naomi says that they have to go, but Alex doesn't want to, as he wants to stop the pods first, but Naomi warns that they don't have time. Wynn tells Alex that he could always stay with him, he's good company, but Alex agrees to leave, and Naomi tells Wynn that she should have let Alex shoot him before she goes as well, but Wynn continues laughing. So in the novels, as I mentioned, Kotar wasn't there. It was Holden's intention to destroy the Agatha King to prevent the spread of the protomolecule, but once on the CIC, he discovered that it can't be destroyed remotely, and the self-destruct, if they press the self-destruct button, it happens immediately. So he prepares to die with the ship, but Larson tells him that he'll stay behind and blow the ship so that Holden can go. When Holden protests, Larson points to a tear in his suit where he's been infected by the protomolecule, saying that he can't go back anyway. So Holden salutes his sacrifice before leaving. Now, you could say that in a way Kotar took Larson's narrative place as being the one to sacrifice himself to destroy the Agatha King. But either way, this was an extremely powerful death for a character who was explored much more in the show than he was in the novels. And seeing Avasarala crying over his speech was indeed quite powerful. And again, I absolutely loved how Wynn was laughing hysterically at his own impending doom and made things so much more ominous. So I'm going to give this a +5. Alex and Naomi speed away on the Razorback as the Agatha King is destroyed. Alex then says they need to warn Mars about the pods. Naomi says they do, but warns that what Wynn said on the bridge was right, that Mars may not get all the pods, which, the transponder codes are now active thanks to Naomi. So she calls Holden and Amos and proposes that they give the transponder codes to Fred Johnson, who has the UN missiles, which he can use to destroy all the pods before they reach Mars. But Naomi wants all 4 of them to agree to this before doing so. Everyone agrees, so Naomi sends the message to Fred Johnson, who uses the missiles to destroy all of the pods. Now, in the novels, to destroy the pods, all they needed was the transponder codes. Once active, Mars could destroy the pods easily and at a safe distance. They didn't need Fred Johnson's help, and the Rocinante never had to give Johnson the transponder codes. But I understand why the show did it this way, because it was a nice redemption for Naomi to make up for giving the protomolecule to Fred Johnson without checking with her crew first, where here she made sure to check with everyone first and get their approval. Plus, it solidified Johnson as the legitimate power, which in the novels has already occurred, which will be important for the storyline going forward. It also made the UN missiles Johnson took relevant to the story and gave him something to do with them. However, the show offered no reason why Mars couldn't just destroy the missiles themselves, as in the books. Avasarala notes that space is vast, so shooting them down once they had the transponder codes was easy. But I do like how this works for the story narratively, so I'm going to give this a +2. We are then treated to a musical montage. The first image we see is of Alex helping Bobby into the med bay, who is severely injured from her battle with the protomolecule hybrid. So in the show, after she killed the hybrid, she called for evac from the Rosinante. I'm not sure who came and got her. Surely not Avasarala. Probably Amos, as Prax was taking the children back and Holden was escorting Jules Pierre Mal, and Alex and Naomi were still in orbit. Anyway, in the novels, the communications was being blocked, and Bobby noted how it was a good thing her suit came back online, otherwise she would have been stranded out there. But I must admit, seeing Alex helping Bobby into the medbay was very touching, so I'm going to give this a +1. We then see Holden push Jules Pierre's Mal into a room Avasarala is in and makes him get on his knees before her. Now, as I said, in the novels, Mal wasn't on Io, and we did get a scene where Avasarala told Mal, how screwed he was, that he would never see the outside of her prison cell again, and that his empire had been torn apart. And all the while, Holden got to watch and take in it with satisfaction. Now, I understand the show is pressed for time and they may not have been able to have the same sort of scene, but it was a lot more satisfying than this, which, if I'm being honest, is a bit silly. To have Jules Pierre Mal kneel before her! Who is she, Zod? So I'm going to give this a -2. We then get a shot of Prax tucking May into bed while showing her her backpack with her favorite stuffed toy inside, the one that she had dropped on Ganymede, and the two embrace. This was an absolutely needed scene to show the happy family back together again. In the novels, we got a lot more scenes with Prax and May reunited as a family again. In fact, Avasarala for a while looked after May while Prax was sleeping, and she wanted May to call her Nana. But I understand the show has less time to spend on stuff like that without it becoming too anticlimactic, which, if I'm being honest, I thought the books were maybe a little anticlimactic. And this was a nice, short, and succinct way to show the happy family reunited again, so I'm going to give this a +1. We then see Holden and Naomi naked in bed together, embracing, making it clear the two of them has reconciled. However, Holden guesses that Naomi's not going to stay on the Rocinante, and she confirms it by saying it's time. So in the novels, Naomi and Holden were not at odds with each other, so they had nothing to reconcile about. Also, the thing with her not staying is a setup for a storyline where she joins the OPA and becomes the chief engineer on the Behemoth, something that didn't happen in the novels, where she just stayed on the Rocinante. But it was necessary for the show to set this up, so I'm going to give this a 0. Next, we see this giant thing rise out of the orbit of Venus. It's obvious whatever the protomolecule was building. Some say it looks like an acorn, a tick, or a jellyfish. We see Amos in the mess hall of the Rocinante as he's giving the children breakfast, watching this on the news, which refers to it as a protomolecule event occurring on Venus. And Amos just explains, "What the fuck is that?" And he's completely transfixed on the screen, obviously unconcerned about dropping the F-bomb in front of a bunch of children. So in the novels, all the main characters, Holden, Bobby, Prax, Avasarala, and everyone attend a peace summit on Luna, where a representative of Earth, Mars, and the Belt meet to discuss going forward in peace. And it's at the summit when the protomolecule thingy decides to leave Venus, and they play it on the big screen to everyone's horror, and May asks Prax what that is, but he has no answer for her. So this is the end of Caliban's War, Book 2, but in the novels there was one more scene after this where Holden sees the ghost smeller, but the show will put this revelation off until a bit later, which I'm fine with. I think it's better to end on the weird protomolecule thingy and focus on that. And also, I do really love Amos dropping the F-bomb in front of a bunch of children. I think it adds to the awe of the moment in a funny way, so I'm going to give this a +3. So my final adaptation score for Immolation is a +19. Not a bad score, quite high, but not one of my highest. There was a lot more back and forth in this episode than the previous episode. There's things I liked, things I didn't really like. I didn't like how Avasarala and Holden weren't given much to do, and I really was not happy with leaving out the iconic horror zombie scene. But what they did get right, they got very right, such as Draper's encounter with the hybrid, Prax and May being reunited, Wynn laughing like a psychopath, and Amos's classic "I am that guy" line. So definitely a net positive, and even if there were a few drawbacks. So that's it for my book to show comparison for The Expanse Season 3 Episode 6. I'll be back in just a few days with my book to show comparison for Season 3 Episode 7, where we finally get into the third book, Abaddon's Gate. In the meantime, you can check out my channel for more Expanse videos and many more videos and other shows like Star Trek, Lost, and more, so be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that, and thanks a lot for watching.